Anyway, I don't know if you have somewhere specific you wanted to start. Um, I was just going to summarize and kind of uh, lead things. Um, Last week I tried, or last time we spoke, I tried to bring forward the political dimensions of the gospel, which is anti-authoritarian in character and strongly critical towards any utopian state ideal. And this comes from first the messianic message of the gospel, where any discrimination, any dominance, any dualistic moralism is canceled into a community constituted by the obedience of Christ's call for unity without end through love without limits. Secondly, the patristic theological tradition, which is the church fathers' interpretation of of the gospel's messianic message in order to protect the church's messianic freedom from the empire's dominion over her. They left us theological monuments of great importance and an understanding of human freedom, both socially and personally, in a society distracted by the tree of knowledge. And third, the ascetic tradition, the ascetic tradition's origins come from pre-Christian dualistic movements that existed throughout the empire. These were eventually Christianized and given a Christian character. And that those ascetic communities became the church's consciousness against any uh, power, both inside or outside the church. They were critical of against any such power encroachment, hierarchical structures. So these three both criticize the utopia of a state savior and its three pillars, which I tried to show last week: civil law, its money value system, and bourgeois society, that is, in the economic individual consumptive unit, human being reduced to a consumer, not a citizen, a consumer subject. You can see that in our lingo today too. We're consumers. So this is the work that the church continues today. She's the conscience of the church. She is constantly being crucified for the sake of the world, continuing the work of Christ. I was thinking last Sunday in in church when we read the epistle. It was from Hebrews. I wrote it down. It said that Jesus suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Therefore, let us go forth to him outside the camp and bear the abuse he endured, Paul says. For we have no lasting city. Now, the city, you have to understand, the word city in Greece is not just a population center where business and commerce and some cultural activities take place. The polis, the polis was the ideal of the Greek politia. The whole meaning of your life as a Greek was the polis, the us. So Paul uses the word, he says, but we seek the city, polis, and now he gives it obviously a Christian content, which is to come. Not this life, here now, it's to come. Through him, then let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of lips that acknowledge his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have. Paul is constantly coming back to this redistribution of wealth concept, which he gets into in 2 Corinthians as well, which I'll touch on later. But in freedom, right? In freedom. For such sacrifices are pleasing to God. So by definition, the church is political because she's an us, a city, and apophatic because she is love. She calls us to a life kataphisi, that is under nature, instead of paraphisi, against nature or abnormal, normal versus abnormal, so that we can attract the grace of God to live hyperphisi, that is supernaturally. And she comes in, as I mentioned last time, she's not pacifist. It's not a matter of ethics. It's a matter of ontology, which means that she comes into violent conflict That is, she can exercise violence against all symbols of human division, which are the result of abstract reductions of all human political structures of power, highest among which, for me, I think for Paul, is money itself, is the ultimate symbol of division. Money is the dominant global religion in practice, even if no one believes it in principle. The quest for money is the one practical activity that unites the diverse people of the contemporary globalized world. And you can see this in the integrity that the apostles had when they asked Jesus, who can be saved? When he says to them, it's harder for a rich man to go through the eye of a needle, or for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, than a rich man to get to heaven. They didn't interpret that question as implying a small group of people that live somewhere in Manhattan or outside of DC. They understood that Jesus was referring to a pan-human possessiveness, the desire for everybody to accumulate stuff that thinks because they think their salvation comes in that accumulation of stuff. So division has a name, has a face, and his name is demon. Right? Theo, demon from the Greek theo, which means to separate two things. Division or fragmentation is the demon which governs the dominion or power. And he, the devil, diabolos, diavolo, to separate two things. Demon and the devil mean the same thing. They mean separating, dividing. The devil took Jesus, right, and showed him all the kingdoms of this world. And he said, I'll give you all this dominion and power because it belongs to me, the devil says. I will give it to whomever I want as long as you worship me. So people who worship power worship the devil. Contrary, Jesus calls us to a unity without limits, where everyone will recognize in the person face of the other his true self. Person face, think about that. In the Greek, I'm not aware of any other language, both the word prosopo means both person and face. Prosopo means before your eyes, prosopsi. The Latin persona means before your hearing, right? Per sonar, sono, sonogram, sonar. Greek is before your eyes, and it's the same word, person and face, prosopo. So he calls us to a unity where everyone will recognize in the person face of the other his true self, and where the liberty of each will be realized in the liberty of the other. Because you are called to liberty, Paul tells us in Galatians. And the law is summarized in love for him and to love the other as yourself. In the as yourself, os eaftos, is typically translated as love the other as you love yourself. So that's not the only interpretation of os eaftos. Os eaftos can also mean, if it's the primary meaning here, is as if in the other is your true self. See, that's consistent with sinchoro, to forgive. Forgive in the English means to let go, to forego of somebody's debt against you, but the Greek sinchoro means way more than that. Sinchoro means to occupy the same space, right? And that can only happen in the body of Christ, because Christ is the ultimate true symbol as opposed to diabolos, devil, which means to separate two things. Jesus unites two things. So the word symbol has its daily usage of a material reality that represents some immaterial reality, like a flag, I suppose, can represent patriotism or a country. But there's a deeper meaning where a symbol, and Schmemann gets into this beautifully, where the word symbol means a material reality that manifests without exhausting an immaterial reality. So through its participation in it, right? So bread and wine, in that sense, are symbols of Christ. Each one of us is a symbol of Christ. anyone baptized and chrismated. We manifest tipo and topu Christu, not just the bishop, every Christ, every Christian who realizes the potential he's been given through baptism and chrismation becomes tipo and topu Christu, a type and place of Christ, symbol of Christ in that sense. And that gives a deeper, another meaning to the word liberty, eleftheria. Liberty comes from the Greek word eleftheria, whose root is elefsis, which means arrival. So liberty is a movement from the bondage of the I to you. See, it's in that movement to my brother, to my neighbor, that all the gifts that I've been given, the talents, the calling, all of them become manifest. They're not buried. So this unity that Christ calls us to invalidates every form of violence, because violence is the tool and work of division and fragmentation. Either as natural violence, military, Matthew 26:52 is what I referred to here, ideological violence, like national, Romans 10:12, or as political violence, law, Galatians 3:10. But this call to unity doesn't remain simply on the level of a psychological type of rejection of division and the power it serves. It rather takes the form of energetic actions against them. In all of that rejection of the violence par excellence, which is economic, the monetary division of society. Economic fragmentation is the most foundational form of violence, that which makes power possible. And you can see Paul in 2 Corinthians 8, how he develops his vision of redistribution of wealth between local churches with the goal of complete economic equality. And he says that to achieve economic equality, since the geographic spread of the ancient unified church made common property unfeasible in a world where property is the foundational political existential principle, he's not hoping for some kind of ethical capitalism, but its reputation, through the refutation of its demand for possession and accumulation. And he's not concerned about some kind of socialism either, and it's with all its mechanisms of forced redistribution. He's simply consistent with his calling of unity, for unity with Christ. He recognized that there cannot be unity as long as there's an economic inequality and fragmentation, because unity, first of all, means unity of creation on every level, from the most material to the most spiritual. And you can see this in Jesus's final prayer in John 17, where he says, Father, keep them in your name so that they are one as we are one. And how are Jesus and the Father one? Jesus himself has already answered that. All that is mine is yours, and all that is yours is mine. Remember, prior, as Aristotle, as Pelagius, and as others wrote long ago, wealth was always the fruit of somebody else's labor, either through slavery, theft, bribes, patronage, or taxes. And what made inequality of wealth possible was the creation of money, this abstract space where I can take your labor, put it in this abstract space called money, and stick it in my drawers. Now, what modern capitalism has done is it's democratized that ability to take others' labors and store it in my drawers. See, it's given me now the power to take somebody else's labor. First, long ago, was very, very few people could do that. Now, with today's money, remember, today's money is the first immaterial thing man has created. So you have, in the two kingdoms the Lord talks about, you have his kingdom, which is the virtuous cycle of self-offering and selfless love. And then you have the vicious cycle of possessiveness, a selfish love, known as the kingdom of mammon. Now, I look, for me, that's a key for understanding the movements of history, kingdom of mammon. And I kind of see as simultaneously in history, there's two currents. There's a strong current and then there's an undercurrent. There's an evolution and a devolution, if you will. From from Adam's fall, we have a and the bondage of man to devil, death, and sin, we have a continuing devolution. That's the symbolism of the declining ages for me, right? Declining ages. You have this continuous devolution, therefore, and then Jesus inserts himself in history. And so there's an undercurrent, a real evolution happening. And that evolution and that undercurrent is the church. So, so this kingdom of possessiveness of mammon is the kingdom of illusion. It's the angel of light because it proceeds from the fantasy of man, from his abstract reductive spirit. It's an inversion of the kingdom of Christ. It's the angel of light. Since true freedom can only come from the restoration of our nature in the uncreated energies of God, so that we can then in turn have healthy relationships, this kingdom wants to transform nature through the power of fantasy, money, technology, thereby creating ever more layers of illusions of freedom, of democracy, of wealth, of knowledge, of control, mastery, and progress. These are all illusions. Like I said last time, the money we have and the wealth we have is an illusion. It doesn't belong to us. The house we have doesn't belong to me. I have to pay a tax on it. If I don't pay the tax, I'll lose it. So everything is an illusion. That's why Paul talks about we have to use the same language, so we have to take every word captive. We have to re-signify the words that we use, give them new content. So it's a kingdom of magic, not because its technology and science don't conform to laws of physics, but because of the expectations from said endless accumulation of data, technology, and control. See, it's the expectations we have of those things that make them magic, not because they necessarily violate some laws of physics. But every bit of technology atrophies a human function. Remember, we started this discussion before we were recording with the about the terracing that was done on Greek mountains. Well, what did when we developed the drilled down 100 meters and got water, our knowledge of managing rainwater atrophied because the technology, now I drill a hole, get my water. But now that the rains are diminishing in Greece, 3, 4 generations have gone by, the terraces have fallen apart, no one knows how to manage rainwater anymore. We've atrophied this accumulated human experience of managing rainwater. So now we have more intense flooding, etc. Anyway, just to connect it to what we were saying prior before.
But Dr. Spiros, on that point, wouldn't you say that one set of skills has atrophied, but some other set of skills, maybe it is possessed more narrowly, like how to build these drills and design them and how to operate them, has grown, right? So isn't that really just another instance of this inequality that you were describing, that it used to be everyone kind of knew how to, let's say, feed themselves. Now a very narrow subset of people do.
Well, think about another aspect of that too, is that, as you had mentioned, this terracing was done on a communal level because it had to be
Sure.
done on the level of a whole watershed. Today we have the abstraction of my property somewhere, which has nothing to do with a whole watershed. And the technology, just like the money, enables me to do something independently of anybody else. There's no us anymore. There's just me acting independently. But the long-term result of that really is a decay and an atrophy of communal living, because that's part of what the whole money system does. I mentioned too, is that it alienates us. The nature of money alienates me, then and the nature of labor today alienates me from my labor, the product of my labor, but it also alienates me from my neighbor because I'm in competition with him now.
Yeah, I've often thought about how similar Holland is, the Netherlands is to Venice, that both places, of course, 1,000 years apart, really in time, had to create themselves through this battle with water and through communal engineering projects, and to reclaim from the sea or from the swamp, the very land they stand on. That's true of Boston, by the way, to a
Well,
large extent.
by the way, you say that before I forget, because I'm at an age now where I forget. It's
Yeah,
very interesting because the two cities are connected because,
sure. Very similar trajectories. But yeah, go ahead.
well, in terms of Venice and Netherlands, money from the Roman Empire and the systems of banking that eventually wound up in today's system across Netherlands in England moved from Rome to Venice to Netherlands and then to finally to London. And I guess I can't help see the symbolism there. Both are fighting water, for me, a symbol of the Holy Spirit, through engineering. They're the uh, I can't help but see the that struggle of using technology to fight God, to fight the natural order
Sure, that's what
through
all cities do. All cities are trying to
through
set
their
up some kind of
through their money
refuge
and
from
power.
nature.
Yeah, through money and power to set up their little kingdom. And it's funny that through both of those places, you have the flow of money, capital that moved from south to north and eventually went across the channel to London in the 1600s to 1500s to create the city of London and the money system we have today.
But
You know,
Dr.
I'd
Spear,
like to,
I have
oh,
another question though too, because I mean, as persuasive, and it everything you're saying is sounds correct to me, but someone reading Adam Smith would say, but wait a second here, with this money economy, we have a human cooperation on a global scale to make a pencil, to make anything, we're calling upon far-flung networks of cooperation. So isn't our social cooperation greater than ever? And how would you respond to that pushback against, saying that, well, money has, erased the communal? I mean, I think there's an obvious way, but how would you?
well, again, that's kind of why I was mentioning how I see two kingdoms maturing in history. One is devolving, one is evolving. One is an angel of light, created light. One is uncreated light. So there's a myth of progress that is tied to technology that's going to solve our communal problems. What I can see is that it's made war a hell of a lot more destructive. What I can see that it's made that what we're building with all this technology while we're distracted with a pencil is the bureaucracy that's created an enormous system of slavery
Yeah.
with invisible chains that's gutted me of my humanity, right? Because the issue isn't the outward, the issue is what's going on in the heart. And if all this is driving self-deification, then it's a devolution that's going the wrong way. Because I'm not defined by efficiency, which is another myth and another anti-human element of our society. So all of this stuff is like I said, it's magic because of the expectations we have from it. So think about it. In the next life, are we going to need doctors? Are we going to need lawyers? Are we going to need insurance companies? Are we going to have real estate agents? So what's all this progress for then?
Well, I mean, I can't really pretend to imagine what the next life looks
Yeah,
like,
it's
but I
hard to
mean,
imagine. It's hard to imagine unity without end and love without limits. I mean, but it definitely won't include all this stuff.
but why would that be? In other words, and this question, let's say we oppose every symbol of division. Would that include gender as well? I mean, is the idea that you're saying that there should be no gender, everything should be gender neutral? I mean, these
Oh,
things can be symbols of
no, no,
division,
no.
but they can also be
Gender's
instruments of unity.
no. The issue is not to not recognize our nature. The issue is, am I through force and violence going to subjugate nature to my desire and will, or am I going to transfigure nature so that everywhere God is manifest, that is his love and unity? And what I see in civilization is a subjugation of nature. And it's the deception is to take a small piece of time out and abstract that uh, from its progress and and not put it in its bigger context. So, for example, again, we talked earlier about uh, rain and how our intervention has made rain and rainstorms much more destructive by burning down forests, etc. So human interventions attempt to solve one problem, but then down the road, 100, 500 years down the road, they're, they cause a host of other problems. We supposedly increased our food supply through monoculture farming, but what we've created is highly processed foods, nutritionless and tasteless. Well, how is that helping people, right? And now we know that something like 70% of Americans suffer from chronic metabolic disease, heart disease, dementia, high blood pressure, diabetes, are all chronic metabolic diseases.
Even obesity, right, is
Obesity,
essentially,
right? Because now we have new children born obese. You can't blame them,
no,
right?
it's
So,
in the water somehow now.
okay, yeah,
Yeah,
and well, okay, in the water, it's in
in the food.
it's from the continuous daily micro poisoning that our technology and lives are giving are feeding us. That poisons in our water, that poisons in our food predominantly. It poisons that poisons in our house. Our houses, to make them super energy efficient and green, are full of petrochemicals and plastics that don't allow the house to breathe. So they're behind those walls, they're full of mold. And we know mold can make you psychotic, neurotic, and bring a whole host of other diseases. We
Right.
know that around golf courses, people have twice the risk of Parkinson's from all the toxic stuff that's poured onto those grasses to keep them looking so perfect. A
Okay,
mile
but
within a
but
mile around a golf course. So all this technology is produced. That's why Johns Hopkins, remember Johns Hopkins did a study 20 or so years ago showing medicine the third leading cause of death in the US.
but here's my point. So a person listening to that might, a Christian might simply say, well, the previous generation did the best they could. And we're not babies. We're not here to just sit in a sofa. Our job is to correct their mistakes and try to prevent from passing on mistakes to the next generation. It's just life. There's always a cross to carry. There's always something to fix. Our generation is going to fix the fact that food is no longer nutritionally dense, that agriculture is, and then some other, I mean, if you say, well, everything we fix just causes more problems,
Well, hold on,
that
hold on,
could
hold
just
on, hold
lead
on.
to
See, hold on one second.
inactivity.
So there is a generation. I have land, and I want to relate to that land in a way that honors the Lord and the gift He gave me.
Yes.
So my relation to that land is not going to be one of I'm going to subjugate you to my desires. My relationship to the land now involves a paradigm shift. I'm going to cooperate with this land, cooperate with the land. So I look at nature, I see that nature works as as an ecosystem, right? You don't have a million acres of just corn growing in nature, or 1,000 olive trees, whatever. You have an ecosystem. So I can apply science and technology to help me understand how that ecosystem works, how fungi and bugs interact to control. Oh, but here's another aspect. Darwinism teaches us that the Darwinist looks at nature and sees violence, the strong competing and destroying the weaker, right? I look at nature and I don't see that. What I see is cooperation, because an ecosystem couldn't exist without cooperation. Within that ecosystem, yeah, there's violence and there's the lion eating the gazelle and whatever. But the bigger context that most people seem to miss is that there's actually a cooperation for the ecosystem to exist.
Well, certainly, and more people are coming around to that
Okay.
view in all sorts of realms. So, I mean, it seems to be you're saying, depending on the purity of my heart, I will be more likely to see the world as something to understand and cooperate with.
Okay, so here's another point that's related to this.
Yeah.
If modern man, secular man, is is operating in his relationship to nature under the pressure of the looming death that's before him, that he sees in the mirror every day.
Yes,
So that's why
we do.
he's not patient to actually study the long-term effects
Mm,
of his technology and
yes.
science before imposing it. The weight of death on his shoulders presses him to believe in magic. You see what I'm saying? To have
Right.
expectations that he cannot have from something he has not adequately studied. The
Gosh, okay,
Christian is what produces
yes.
science because the Christian understands because there's a creator, okay, there's logic to the world, there's logos, okay? That therefore I can study the world and I can come up with mechanisms and technologies and processes that help me cooperate with the world in a way that can improve our lot here and actually improve the quality of the world I leave behind to the next generation. But under the pressure of death and the fear of death, I don't take the time and my greed and all the other passions because I've just discovered something. I'm going to hurry up and AI, got to hurry up and apply it because there's money to be made here. The effects will be downstream of the money I've made. I'll be long gone. I'll be living in my little paradise in New Zealand or whatever, in my island in Greece. No one's going to come after me when 20, 30 years down the road, we're going to see that the side effects of applying a technology willy-nilly because the pressure of death, on the one hand, my greed and my other passions, envy and whatever, power, desire for power, and on the other hand, the pressure of death over me means that I don't give the adequate time to a new technology, to a new idea.
Yeah.
You see, for long-term and proper studies.
But that makes sense to me. I mean, this whole account makes much more sense to me as a single man, which I am. The moment I picture myself as either married or a father, then that logic changes because it's not my death that I'm worried about. It's the death of my child. And it's not my greed that I'm worried about. It's about providing for my wife. So, I mean, this
Okay,
account of the fallen human race seems to leave out really the real tragedy, which is that the moment you love someone in this fallen world, you become implicated in these passions, even if you're a dispassionate person. I mean, we expect the state to stamp out the COVID epidemic, or someone did at any rate. They expected themselves, and to cut corners to make that happen. I mean, that was the
but it
pressure that they
wasn't.
felt.
But it turns out the state was responsible for producing that virus. The virus is as much a weapon as its treatment,
Well, I
right?
mean, that was obvious. I mean, to
So
anyone who
you
had an
you
open
kind of just
mind, it
proved for
was
me what I was
obvious
telling
by
you.
the, by June of 2020 that the thing had escaped from a lab. Only people
Okay.
who were really dedicated to pretending not to have their eyes open. But was that what you mean that it came from bioweapons research in
Yeah,
Wuhan or?
exactly. What are we doing this kind of research for in the first place? And secondly, here you can see now, especially with the recent letters that came out, emails from Fauci and the rest of them, how a bureaucratic system is more concerned about preserving itself than its population.
Sure,
And
sure. Any organization lives for self-defense. I mean, it has the
okay,
same passions of fearing
right. So
death.
the moment you create a bureaucracy,
Even
a
committees do
Ministry
that.
of Education, its primary purpose is no longer education, it's self-preservation. It cannot adopt, it doesn't evolve, it doesn't develop. It can't say, okay, now we have to cut ourselves out. Again, because fallen man lives under the weight of death and his fears, the fears that produces, like you mentioned earlier, I got to feed my family, got to take this
Yes.
paycheck. And that's why Hannah Arendt, in her wonderful book, Totalitarianism, what she saw in the Eichmann trial is that evil people didn't have horns. They were ordinary, everyday people who just didn't want to know how their little piece of work, taking this piece of paper and moving it to that desk over there, how it fit into the big picture of things. And that, frankly, is evil. And that's why that's why the scriptures tell us, no one is good but God. That's why our civilizations are going to be burned up. They're
So,
built on rubble and water and hay and straw.
but you said there's two movements, right? They're not only built on that. They are built on love. I mean, people are trying to, defend their nations or
Well,
preserve
hold
their
on now.
ways
Don't
of life.
confuse love with instinct. A mama bear will defend her children even against Papa Bear if he gets hungry and gets a little too close to them. So that's instinct. That's not love. Okay, caring for your own, whether it's your little family, your little tribe, these concentric circles of human organization, is not love. It's instinct. Now we don't reject instinct, love, but love is built on it. So
So this is the
uh, it,
kataphysin. That instinct is the kataphysin, and we're looking for the hyperphysin,
that's
as you
correct.
said.
That's right. So in Saint Gregory says the family is the laboratory of love. And by the way, politics begins in the family. The family is the small political unit, that husband and wife. Okay, so in the family, I learned to love my wife so that I can love everybody else's wife. My responsibility to them is different, but love is one. I learned to love my children so that I can love your children. My responsibility to them is different, but my love for them is the same. That's what moves me out of instinct, that basic instinct, that order that God put into nature itself, to what is truly love, that is the presence of God in our lives, a transfiguring of the limits of my nature and the death that it's bound to. So in the family is where, in the family, that kitchen, that meal is an extreme political event. How I how I've sourced the food. Remember, Cain slays Abel because of his jealousy, because God wasn't pleased with his sacrifice. And what was his sacrifice? It was food. He gave second-rate food to God, to the offering. He kept the best for himself. When you come over my house, I'm going to give you the best that I have. When my wife cooks a meal, there's a priestly function there. How she sources the food. We don't bring trash wine and trash wheat and bread to the church. Well, we do today, unfortunately, but the food, the wheat, how it's grown, how it's produced with a love. My wife will use holy water and whatever she cooks. She does her crossover things. There's a blessing there. That's a political process in her relationship to the material world. And even if she's tired and she doesn't feel like cooking, because she's not cooking for herself, she's cooking for us. There's a different energy there. And then the way the table is set for us all to meet.
How does this make it a political process? What's the definition of political here? Just that it's the politia, the
Well, there's
general
an us. That's right.
civilizational
There's a
order.
political ideal here.
Oh,
It's
this
like
is the
there's a liturgia, right? A liturgy. There's a gathering of the people to do work that work from Sunday goes into my home, but it goes into society too. That there's a pattern, right? Because what is our liturgy? It's a celebration. It's an offering of bread and wine, and then we distribute it to each other as body and blood of Christ. That's done on the miniature level then in my home, and then on the social level in the society I live in. So the issue there is technology and science take their proper subordinate place. You see, they don't become a means of, they're not substituting now my deification. It's not going to be, it's not a they find their proper place under this whole liturgia. And that's That's a whole other, that's a different human being.
Sure, sure. I mean, that seems like, a very hopeful account of technology there. I mean, that we are discovering these things so as to serve others, or so long as within our hearts we remember the provisionality of this world and the as you said that well Christ's parable of a man sows a field and his enemies come at night and they sow weeds among the crops,
Huh?
and it's not immediately evident, but as the things both bloom, then his servant said, well, should we tear up the weeds? And he says, no, because you're going to tear up the good stuff too.
So
Wait
tech,
till,
so
we harvest,
technology,
and then
so,
we're going
so
to
tech,
sort it and we're going to
yeah.
burn the weeds.
So technology and its direction are not accidental, Tim. As man becomes ever more enclosed in his fantasy and narcissism, he develops the technology to close him ever more in his fantasy and narcissism. You see what I'm saying? The technology that isn't just the industrial revolution. Our history books teach it like it's some kind of accident of free markets. And to no, the industrial revolution begins in Birmingham, wherever it began in the Quaker world, to make manufacturing of guns more efficient for the British Empire. The Industrial Revolution isn't just what's described oftentimes in our books. The context of the Industrial Revolution is to make war efficient. Where does internet come from? It comes from the Navy. Most of our technology is developed to make fighting and killing more efficient. Nuclear energy is developed to drop a bomb. Right now, then we take it and we justify it and we can use it for peaceful means and blah blah blah. But it's developed to make killing more efficient.
Sure. I mean, states are naturally anxious about other states. I mean, that's
Anyway,
and as you're saying, they should be. The other states are also motivated by the same narcissism
okay.
and
So
self-implosion.
you're coming back to my point is that even if the technology in and of itself is neutral, which I believe it's not, I believe from Tubal Cain, from the way in the Old Testament, what we're seeing is its primary motivation is subjugation and control. Okay. Nevertheless, what motivates fallen man is self-deification, is to subjugate and control. Okay. So
But what's the message for a person, contemplating marriage, contemplating having a family? I mean, this kind of it's a prophetic, and I think, largely or at least importantly accurate account of this fallen world. But, unless the call is go be a monastic and live a world outside of money, outside of possessions, um, everyone is more or less bound, as you say, to in this thing. I mean, what
okay,
is
okay, okay. Hold on.
is it to cultivate a certain attitude towards it, or
So remember, Paul tells us he'd advise us don't get married, be like I am, but he knows he can't. We can't. So the ascetic is crucial as our conscience to remind us what the ideal is. Just like I said, just like I have those icons of the unmercenary saints, that keeps me understanding my limits, my own wickedness, my weakness, and it keeps me in on my knees.
sure?
Okay, so that's crucial. Secondly, Paul tells us, as I said last week or last time we spoke, a key is as if not, buy as if not owning, use the things of this world as if not sovereign. The key to that is that I've overcome the problem of death. Now, a Christian man who has children, first of all, knows that those children don't belong to him. He's stewarding them like whatever else the Lord has given him, including his own life. And one of the reasons I named my daughter Agapi is so that she's connected to a mother who did not stand between her and death, who encouraged her to confess Sophia, her mother, to confess Jesus while she was being slaughtered in front of her mother.
Mm.
Okay.
So they don't
So
make an idol out of the family and an idolization of this world, and they
of
keep
this life, because you're already dead, right?
for here
Your
we have no
baptism and
lasting city.
chrismation, you're dead. It's not you who lives, it's Christ who lives in you. And you are here to be crucified just like Christ. Christ's work hasn't ended. It's continuing in the church through me, through my crucifixion and my children's crucifixion.
So I think a better question to ask then, I mean, at least an essential question is not the political or economic, but the artistic. Because you just said, look, I have a work of art. Well, it's more than art to us, but an icon on my wall that reminds me of my limits. And operating with it, with an awareness of operating creatively within an awareness of limit is the hallmark of all great art. But the best statue, the best building is going to burn up. Is it still worth make creating art? Because because now what you've done is you've recast the political and the human and the familial drama as this is my artistic situation. Given these constraints, the constraints of, the cruelty of money, the implacability of division, and everyone's narcissism and fear of death, I've still got to move forward, and those are my limits for my creativity. And now my life is a work of art. I mean, it's still worth creating art.
Well, but what constitutes art is that which for me reflects Jesus. So there's no greater art than a mother and a father raising up children who
Mm,
reflect that image. Again, theology, right, is not the words of Christ on the paper. It's Christ, the word himself.
mm,
The art refers us to a reality. And the only true beauty and the only reality is Jesus. So art is really art when it moves us in that direction, when it reflects that beauty. So let me I think I want to connect a few things you've raised that are very important and bring it back to the family. Uh, and just kind of to touch on something we still haven't uh, touched on. Um, when a in a family, the husband and wife, okay, the smallest political unit, the family begins with a man and a woman, right, who together complete are a complete human. Okay, I I want to be discreet, like Paul tries to be discreet. But beauty begins with the process of creating, in this case, procreating. There's a trilogy or a three concentric circles, or I don't know how you want to put a chain of sex, eros, love. Sex is the glue that that make eros a reality, and then eros is that thing. It because both of those are physical. Those two things, they have their tides, their ups and downs. They come and they go. But that's what makes the painful work toward love possible. It alleviates the suffering of love. It's not that love is by its nature suffering, it's that my ego and pride make love difficult, right?
mm.
But the Lord has provided this sex eros core to alleviate that suffering. But in that holy of holies, that bed that couple unites in, okay, there has to be, here's the real beginning of political life. There has to be a true, consensual, free, mutual giving and sharing, guilt, without moralizing, completely of the one to the other. Okay, so the genders are crucial here. What Paul is referring to is not that. He's not talking about denial of nature, but using that as a division.
Sure.
Okay, it's the opposite he's talking about. So one of the biggest problems we have today is people still have a problem with their sexuality. We can see in the extremes. Okay. People have a difficult time talking about these matters without debasing them. It's kind of the reason why we don't have a verse where, we have one instance of Jesus crying. We don't have a verse of him laughing because our humor quickly degenerates, especially, I don't know, especially among men. Uh, so same thing with discussions of sexuality. If if there's any sickness, psychopathy in that marital bed, in the union of the man and the woman, that's going to come out as a bad energy in every other aspect of their family life and social life. Okay, so spiritual life begins with the control of our logismi, our thought world. And for the man, for the married man, not succumbing to Adam's sin of submitting to female fantasies and insecurities. Now, a woman can talk about her side of things. As a man, men repeat Adam's sin continuously, day after day after day, to keep peace in the home, and because they need the woman, the female. Adam followed Eve because he needed her. Okay, so it's vital and it's connected to the sexual life. The seed, the logos, the word symbolic in the seed. Remember, man generates, women give birth. Andras yenai, yeneka tikti. The man generates, the woman incarnates, so to speak. Okay, the two are necessary together. A word that can't incarnate is a meaningless abstraction. And a woman who has no seed to incarnate is just a bunch of emotions, a bunch of sentiment and fantasies. So the two are desperately must fit together. It's that word, that seed has to give birth. I have to imagine if the logos says to that mountain, fall into the sea, my word should have that kind of power. So
So
the
you're saying
man,
here that to get away from abstraction here and then into reality of the something concrete, expression of these words
remember,
or this
remember what I
power.
said the other day. Theology is experience. It's connected to the real world. It's not,
Sure.
it's not the word of Christ. It's Christ, the word. It's his presence, his reality. So we have to, I'm kind of in my head, I have these bullets, when
I mean, I see what you're saying about how this is a political act because it's a communal act, and then it's a vision of the polis as mutual self-giving. I mean, it does seem to me that within that embrace is not only a mutual self-offering, but there is a kind of mutual possession which is celebrated, and it isn't. People don't find that oppressive. Right.
Mhm.
There is a submission and a counter submission
Right.
at work there. And why can't larger political order be like that? I mean, if the prime minister is such a selfless and self-giving person, why shouldn't the people sort of long for his leadership? And then of course, and is somehow is submitting to the state, to the nation, if not, I mean, not the state,
Okay,
but the
so to get to this, I'm laying down principles sort of in a
yes.
small, tiny political unit so we can see their broader impact socially, and then we'll get to what that means politically. Because when that seed is incarnated, you have children. Now, the idea isn't to raise, you have Loki, you have name giving, right? Name. Well, what the Lord tells Adam to do in the garden, name, right? So the Logi produce onomata, names. So a, a man and a woman begin to show the fruits of their love through what they produce as other human beings. Nothing more beautiful than to produce another potentially image, something in the image and likeness of God.
Sure.
So raising those kids now, the default and easy thing to do is to demand obedience. But that's not what the Lord calls us to raise, obedient automatons. He called us to freedom. So now, how do I raise a child not with guilt and law, but reframing everything from moralistically on the basis of love? This requires constant vigilance on the part of the parents. And a constant attempt, constant patience and critical thinking. Okay. Um, I guess I'll try and give some examples from my own experience. I come home and the two boys are fighting. Now, my wife wants instant justice. She wants a trial, a court, who did what, whose fault, and then to mete out the sentence and move on, settle everything. I don't operate that way. For me, that's not, and initially, that would be my thought too, being born and raised in America. But no, that's not the right way for me. That's not going to raise up. I'm not interested in fault. I'm interested in responsibility. And I'm not going to find the beginning of this ball of yarn. Who did what? He said, she said, blah, blah, blah. So I took the older one. I remember when I took the older one, I said, let's go for a walk. We went for a walk going down the street here, and it was a May or something. And boop, in front of us, we stumbled on a viper. Oh, yes, they're about a meter long in grease. They're all over the place over here. I said, Athanasio, what would you do if that viper bit you? He said, oh, I'm just supposed to try and get the poison out, spit it out. I said, would you chase him? He said, no, the poison's working. I said, when the poison of anger enters your head, what do? He understood immediately. No, he goes after his brother. He doesn't try and get rid of the demon of anger. So I remember another time a teenager asked me, Dr. Lazarou, what do I think of masturbating? Well, that teenager's not going to ask me again. The easy default position for a religious person is to say, oh, bad, don't do it. But that insults his intelligence, and that teaches him that's shallow and moralistic, as far as I'm concerned. The question is to reframe for me something. So I said, well, what do you think of it? I started the whole Jungian sort of Socratic questioning. Okay, it's self-pleasure. Well, a good steak gives me pleasure. My wife gives me pleasure. A movie gives me pleasure. So obviously, it's not a problem with pleasure in and of itself. I said, well, when when we have a good steak, of course, or I'm doing something with my wife, we do say a prayer. Do you say a prayer before that? No, we give thanks for that. It's kind of odd. Okay, so that means you're totally solo on this. What's going on in your head?
Hmm.
Well, subjugating somebody else to my desires without asking them. There's a subjugating going on in your head. You see what I'm saying?
I mean, it seems to me like, the issue of children is not obedience, but you are teaching them how to be free. Because freedom isn't, I think we have the sense, the hippie sense is that freedom is automatic.
Yeah, right.
Limits are the things that destroy freedom. But in fact, freedom is a complicated task which is inextricably bound up with responsibility and
Okay,
consequences and all kinds of things.
so that's
We're
it.
really trying to
No,
build free human beings, free also from the passions. And
so you cannot be free if you're a slave to the passions. You cannot control yourself if you do not know yourself. And if you don't know yourself and you don't control yourself, somebody else controls you. So you're not free.
no, you're
In
not.
fact, in fact, if you haven't been baptized and chrismated, you're still in bondage to devil, sin, and death.
Right. I think
Okay?
the freedom is inseparable from union with Christ. I mean, on
That's
your
right.
own, no matter
Exactly right.
how.
So that union with Christ is the liberty. But Paul tells us, I'm free to do all things, but not all things are profitable for me. And if my freedom is destructive for you, I will freely restrict myself because freedom is the opposite side of the coin of freedom is love. And the rim is responsibility. And here's another aspect of growing children. As they grow, their liberty increases, my liberty decreases.
Well, well, but now you have a new kind of liberty because you have potential friends. You have brothers in Christ.
Okay, you
You
see
have
how now,
sons
wait,
who you have a different relationship with your son.
okay, but here, and now think about the social implications of this. Jesus doesn't tell the Samaritan woman, go get 5 degrees and then go talk about me. She had an immediate experience of Jesus' love. He says, go and tell them. In our church, even a child's amin has the power to transform bread and wine into body and blood. And in our church, all men and women have to say the amin so that that bread and wine can become body and blood. There has to be at least, if the clergy can't do this by itself, by
No.
themselves. So our church is decentralized and profoundly democratic. Every everyone at the present at the Eucharist, without the amin of the people, we're talking about a dead rich, just a ritual. There's no transformation of anything. The priest doesn't do this by himself. There has to be at least one person there saying an amin, and it could be a child.
Yes. But let's get to this other thing. I mean, you're saying that, the ascetic, is the consciousness of the church and of society. It's a conscious, excuse me, the conscience, which, which checks power. And I'm saying that awareness of limits, is and it is something that indispensable for the creation of art. It's almost what art is. It's creativity within some constraint. And teaching what you're to teach the child to be free is to teach the child to be an artist. Now you're putting this now at this communal
The
level
same applies to
where
surgery, by the way.
the
Go ahead.
artistic act, if we call it that, of the Eucharist has to be an act of communal art, right? It's somehow we together create a beautiful society. And I think
Okay.
that is true because if you have citizens aware of their limits, then all sorts of things are possible. And whereas if you have citizens living in a fantasy, even if it's a politically correct fantasy, a really wonderful fantasy, but it's detached from reality, as seems to be the case in many parts of the world at all times,
Mhm.
then it is no longer beautiful. It's not a beautiful society anymore.
That's what, and so again, you were getting slowly close to the political concepts that I expressed that initiated this whole
Yeah,
discussion.
yes,
That's
yes.
why I say it's counterintuitive in a world that seems to be falling apart, chaotic, ruthless, violent. Many people want a king, a monarch, an Alexander, a Constantine, someone that's going to set order. And I'm saying, no, what's needed. First of all, you're not going to get a King Constantine. You're going to get somebody, bourgeois society degenerates to fascism. It's just a matter of understanding political philosophy. That's where it goes. Okay. What you need, what why I say it's counterintuitive and what you want is democracy is that people have to become responsible. Let me back up a bit. I think you can see where I'm going, but Jesus doesn't treat us in our degenerate status. He treats us, and that's how we should treat our children, in our potential as saints.
Yes. It's a terrifying thought.
Okay, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. But that's how Jesus looks at us, and that's how he treats us. Right? When Dionysius sent the murderer of his brother home, he didn't see him as a degenerate murderer. When he said to the people who came looking for him in the monastery, "We're looking for the murderer of your brother," he wasn't thinking of, he didn't identify that fellow as a murderer, but as an image of God who fell and did this, like David fell and did this. And he sent him away with blessing and provisions, not just blessings, but provisions, physical provisions. So it's terrifying to us, but this is what we have to do. Around me are millions of people who are images of God. They're in bondage, many of them, to the devil still, but they're still images of God. And I have to treat them in that way. Now, that doesn't mean I give my 2-year-old keys to drive. Okay. I also know that democracy is not just going to happen magically. It's not something I push. I'm simply saying that the the way the church treats me gives me an enormous power as an image of God, equal to every other human being. The political implications of that are not a political system hierarchical with slaves at the bottom and a bureaucracy that tells me what to do, good or evil. What's lacking is my participation in the world around me so that my word, my seed falls somewhere and bears fruit, not my constant cutting off. Let me put it this way differently. If men are not in the public square executing, judging, and legislating, they are not men. They've been castrated. Their life is wasted, squandered, pursuing money and the next toy they're going to buy with that money. Their life is reduced to the life of an ant, accumulating and consuming. A man, to be a man, has to have a word that is heard. What we're doing here is a weak, pathetic facsimile of the public square. That's why all these podcasts are happening. Because people have an opinion. They want to say it. And they want to be heard. It's not just a matter of fame. Everybody wants to be in the spotlight. Is that there is a lot of that degeneracy as well, but it's also the desire that this is my nature as a man.
Well, it seems to me that, what we kind of miss out on in education is, I mean, let's say you're educating a child in the light of the things that you've said so far.
Okay, but I'm sorry to interrupt you. One quick.
Yeah,
In
sure.
Athens, one of the 6 core subjects was rhetoric. You had to learn to speak publicly. A democracy can't survive without every man and woman being able to speak publicly.
Can I
So,
interject briefly?
Please, please.
Just um throughout what you've been saying, I've been thinking a little bit about um what perhaps might be, I don't know, it kind of feels like perhaps an immanentized eschatology in the sense that we do have to recognize dialectic as it operates in the world, even epistemologically, like we're not in theoria all the time. Dialectic has to have its place, and logic. But that's just to create, even in epistemology, there's a hierarchy, but so too in the world, there's a hierarchy. And that a hierarchy doesn't necessarily imply the impingement of freedom, but rather can grant a kind of freedom as everything becomes itself in relation to its participation in a thing above it, like Dionysus's divine hierarchy. Every being participates fully in God, is granted full participation in God, however, according to its nature. So stone completely participates in Christ, however, it expresses that participation in its stoneness, which is necessarily a mitigated version of the way that it can be expressed through humans. But so too in the church, like while it is democratic in the sense that, there's neither Jew nor Greek nor whatever else. So like there is Saint Sophrony talks about an inverted hierarchy. Uh, when Christ washes the disciples' feet, he says, you call me teacher and you call me rightly, but I need to wash your feet for you to have a part in me. And Saint Sophrony says, the bishop, it's an upside down pyramid. The lay people are really at the top because they're being served by everyone else, and we venerate those above us, and the clergy in recognition of their place of sacrifice. And so with a monarch or something like that, one could phenomenologically, having read the letters of people in courts and whatnot, they experience a kind of freedom in giving up their freedom. But it's importantly, as you rightly emphasize, I think, a voluntary obedience. But there's like this immanentized eschatology. Sorry,
Well,
Dr. Tim.
can I jump in on two things on that because before just to agree with you before you develop it further. One is that the image of the church is a body with many parts. Not everyone is an ear. Not everyone is a head, right? So there's hierarchy of a different kind. That's just what society is too. It has to be. Um, but when you think about de Tocqueville and his description of what made Americans different, this is the early 1800s. It was that when a problem arose locally, people voluntarily stood on their hind legs, got together, discussed it, and addressed it. And he said, in France, you don't bother. Maybe you petition the local nobleman who petitions his superior, and it goes up the chain of the king, and nothing happens. And he says, Americans were so proactive in solving their problems. So this is the rhetoric stage, and it's also what I'm saying, what you're saying, Joseph. Just because I'm using my rhetorical freedom democracy skills to resolve the fact that the local bridge has washed out, instead of, making peace negotiations with Great Britain after the War of 1812, so what? I mean, the hierarchy is beautiful at every level. And here we are at our level. We are engaging in that freedom. And I'm sure within those committees, little hierarchies form too. It's just you can't escape it. I mean, there's a diversity of talents, and St. Paul is very clear on that. But is that really what you're saying, Joseph, or have I miss? I mean, do I accord with what you're saying? I mean,
I think so. I'll just give the last little bit of what I was going to say, which is like a personal example of when I found that being accorded too much freedom, there's a certain way in which authority can actually grant you freedom in a certain way. So I found very frustrating in some of my educational experience heretofore, uh, the insistence in the classroom that there's a sort of univocality, that everyone's voice weighs the same. Uh, and oftentimes I just want to hear what the professor has to say. They're the one that knows what they're talking about. And yet there's this where all of the students are forced to give their take on this thing they read for the first time. It's like, look, I don't want to hear these people talk about this. Like they don't know what they're talking about.
Okay, don't see.
but they might surprise you too. I mean, don't you sort of need both? I mean, isn't it? I don't know if they're co-equal, but
No, I mean there's
Democracy, guys, fellas, democracy is something. Remember, Sparta was a democracy. In Athens or in Sparta, when specific functions were needed, a general, the whole city didn't go up there and say, we want to be generals. Okay. There were obviously, I am not going to submit myself to the possibility of being a general. I mean, people were intelligent. In a democracy, the 5 or 10 or 15 people who had experience were the ones that were presented before you see what I'm saying? It wasn't
Yes.
just everyone could be a general or everyone could do everything. No, that's not a democracy.
But it is
Democracy,
nice. It is nice if to the extent possible you can push down to people the freedom to resolve the things that are specifically their problem and that they have the expertise on, right? I mean,
yeah, of course, that happened in Sparta and in Athens and in every democracy of ancient Greece, of the
that's
ancient Greek people. So
the
this
Roman
is,
Catholics
I
call that
think there's a
subsidiarity, right?
misconception as to what democracy is. First of all, it's not a system. It simply means that in the end, political power rests with people, not with an oligarchy, not with one person. Now, the shape that takes, exactly because it's not a system, is infinite in its variety. The crucial thing to understand is that power rests with people. Democracy has nothing to do with voting. There's a deception that I want to help overcome in Western thought.
So democracy in this non-system form could delegate itself as monarchy
Of
potentially
course,
and
Sparta
under the
had
right.
two kings.
Yeah, right.
Sparta had two kings. The question is, the final authority of everything were the people. It's the amin of the people. That's what it means.
Well, I mean, this is just the failure to fall into fantasy, right? Every leader knows, orgi lau phoni theu.
Oh, correct.
If the people are angry, that's an ultimate, it's an ultimate thing. I mean, it shouldn't be in a way because, the king, just as you said, that the husband has to not become captive to whatever the anxieties of his wife are, and vice versa, I suppose.
So,
That you know,
by the way,
you want the
another
king sometimes to tell the people no, and it has to have some
absolutely,
educative.
of course, but the democracy doesn't preclude that. So anyway, a key thing, another element I wanted to point out before we close is that democracy did not end in ancient Athens. Democracy and the democratic spirit, see, I shouldn't call it a democracy. I should say the democratic mentality, in fact, spread with Orthodox Christianity. The Byzantine Empire was not an empire in the sense that the previous Roman Empire was or other empires. It was really a cosmopoly. The emperor, if the emperor wanted, and we're talking about a dynamic process over 1,000 years, right? Remember, eventually slavery ended. The death penalty pretty much ended. It was basically only preserved by the end of the empire. It was only preserved for high treason, overthrowing the king or something.
Well, not just eventually, within 300 years. I mean, it was within,
Was
yeah,
scrapped, right? So
slavery as well. Yeah.
that if the emperor or Vasileos he was called, not Автοκράτορ, Vasileos, if the emperor wanted something from other cities, basically the Byzantine Empire was actually a decentralized federation of cities, city-states. The emperor would tell Ephesus or Smyrna or Athens or whatever, we need this. Then the local king or governor would gather with the people of that city to discuss how we're going to achieve this. You understand? There was a process. So you don't have a massive bureaucracy which hides all kinds of grift and corruption. You don't have money shuffling in ways that nobody, one of, this whole mentality, this way of thinking of the Greek people ended in 1922 with the catastrophe of Asia Minor. It's what got Kapodistrias murdered. The big in the 1820s when the Greek state was being established, or the Greek Revolution was occurring, Kapodistrias, who was the one sort of appointed to politically represent Greece as the new governor or king of, or not king, but president of Greece. Why was he murdered? Why did the English and the French want him murdered? Because Kapodistrias would have established a state with a people with a strong democratic tradition, even under the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottomans they wanted their tax. After that, you ran your own towns. If you read the British peripatetics, the lords who would kind of close their castle up for a year and walk through the Greek, I remember reading one of them. They were appalled when an issue had existed in the town or village or city that everyone would get together to solve it, as opposed to the specialist, the expert. The entire town would gather to resolve this. So this democratic mentality was what Metternich hated. And that's why he hated Kapodistrias. And that's why he hated Capodistria, because Capodistria tried to set this up in Switzerland. You know, they have three statues of Capodistria in Switzerland, in Zurich, in Geneva, and in Lausanne. There are statues of Capodistria. He created the enormously decentralized Capodistria, a Greek mind imbued in Orthodox and democratic thinking, was able to piece together as three different nations with different religions who were at each other's throats because of the decentralized way the state was created. Even today, 75 or 80%, I think, of taxes don't go directly to the federal government, they go to the canton. You can see where your money's going.
I think I was going to bring up Switzerland too, as the topic for maybe discussion in a part 3, because I think we should wrap this up for today because we've gone on for a bit.
Well, there are people who are much more intelligent and learned on these matters that can discuss this than I read their books, but you're better to discuss this kind of stuff with people who are vastly more knowledgeable than I am. I mean, if you're interested, I can try and connect you with.
But this beautiful idea of people standing up for themselves, it's a wonderful topic.
Then I remind you, Kissinger did his PhD thesis on Metternich. He loved Metternich, which means he hated Capodistria and Greek democratic thinking, Orthodox thinking. Again, define democracy very, I'm using that word in the sense of that I've described. The power rests with people, not with some hierarchy. Why do they keep the Catholic Church, the whole Vatican structure around? Papism is dead in Europe. Catholic churches are empty because the papal structure is the oldest continuous structure, hierarchical structure of power in Europe. It's a symbol that's necessary for them to maintain.
Well, you're using hierarchy in a different sense than we are. Maybe that's
well, look, again, we have to use the same words. In heaven, the only type of hierarchy that I think will exist is the hierarchy of love. That is, of the great Panagia will always be ahead of me and the apostles and just about every other saint because of how much they embraced Jesus in their lives. So in our eternal process from glory to glory, there'll always be, so there is this type of hierarchy. But hierarchy is a structure of power, is a fruit of division and fragmentation. No hierarchical society can be united. So
you're not asking us to be powerless. You're not asking us to be powerless. So I think even that sort of reference to power as the bugbear is not enough. We need to come back in part 3 and relitigate.
This was good. This was
All
good.
right.
I'll stop the recording.